The helicopter didn't land. It hovered 10 meters above the beach and a crew member pointed at the door. That was the instruction. I jumped. 23 others jumped after me. Nobody helped anybody. We landed on wet sand in gray morning light and the helicopter was gone before the last person hit the ground. No ceremony. Just the island, the cameras, and 24 people breathing too fast. I counted the drones before I counted the players. 14 visible, fixed positions above the tree line, 2 mobile units already tracking the group, one hovering over a heavy-set man in a gray jacket who'd landed first and was already scanning the beach like he owned it. I looked at the other players. 23 strangers. Different ages, different builds, but the same eyes. The eyes of people who had already lost something significant before arriving here. You don't volunteer for a show like this from a position of comfort. You volunteer because the alternative is worse. Mine had been debt. 3 years of it compounding quietly while I worked risk analysis for a logistics firm that collapsed in 11 months. When the firm went, the house went. When the house went, my wife looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before, and then I didn't see her again. They took my name at processing. Replaced it with a number. P14. They said it was for viewer engagement. I think it's because a number is easier to delete than a name. A man in a white jacket stepped out of the tree line. Production staff. The practiced calm of someone who delivers bad news professionally. 24 participants. 1 winner. He paused to let the arithmetic settle. Elimination is non-physical. A player is removed when their resource index reaches 0 or when viewer engagement drops below broadcast threshold for 48 consecutive hours. Another pause. The winner receives full debt clearance, legal record expungement, and a financial package sufficient to begin again. Completely. He looked up from his tablet. Remember, the strong don't win here. The interesting win. He said it the way people say things they've repeated until they believe them. Be interesting. He walked back into the tree line. And then it was just us, and the drones, and the start of something nobody was ready for. The system activated 4 minutes after the helicopter left. A transparent overlay appeared in my field of vision, clean white text sitting on top of the world like a second layer of reality. I blinked. It stayed. The header read, Risk Analysis System, Participant P14. Active. 4 tabs, Threat Assessment. Resource Mapping. Player Profiles. Decision Engine. I didn't touch anything yet. I watched the other players first, looking for signs of their own activations. The brief unfocused stare of someone reading something invisible. The small eye movement of an interface user tracking a cursor nobody else could see. I counted 14 in 2 minutes. We all had something. Different somethings, the reactions were too varied to be the same interface. Whatever the production team had installed, they'd tailored it per player. Mine was risk analysis. My professional competency for 6 years before everything collapsed. The system was built from what I knew, which meant it was also built from my blind spots. Something to remember. June moved first. He walked directly to the supply cache at the center of the beach, marked with a yellow flag, the only visible resource marker. He reached it in 90 seconds, stood on top of it, and said without raising his voice, "My name is June. I'm taking this cache. You want access, you work with me. You don't." He looked at the tree line. It's a big island. 6 players walked to him inside a minute. The beach rearranged itself around the fact of his position and the food beneath his feet. I didn't move. The decision engine activated. 3 options appeared. Option 1, join June's group, cache access secured, safety elevated 60% for 72 hours. Risk, resource dependency on a single dominant player. Option 2, remain independent, locate secondary cache, autonomy maintained, exposure elevated for 48 hours. Risk, isolation before shelter is established. Option 3, approach June as neutral analyst, offer services, access negotiated not surrendered. Risk, he declines, burning the approach permanently. I read all 3. Then I noticed a fourth option, bordered slightly differently, text marginally cleaner. Option 4, signal Minjun directly via resource share, immediate alliance secured, protection elevated 85% for first week. No significant downsides identified. I stared at the last line. No significant downsides. In 6 years of professional risk analysis, I had never produced an assessment that said that. Everything has a downside. Everything has a cost that appears somewhere, in some column, eventually. An option with no visible downside wasn't clean, it was incomplete. Or manipulated. I closed the fourth option without selecting it. Filed the observation. Moved on. I walked north along the beach while the group consolidated around Minjun. Not running, steady pace, someone with a destination. The resource mapping tab had already flagged a secondary water source 340 meters north and a natural shelter in the rock face beyond it. Not as good as the central cache. But mine. I reached the rocks and assessed: shallow cave, clean overhang, stream outlet 10 meters east, defensible from the south. Current assets, personal pack, location advantage, system interface, 6 years of analytical experience that had failed to save me personally but might, in this specific context, be exactly enough. 48 hours of food if careful. 1 water source. 0 allies. And one question that was already more important than any of the above: who had placed that fourth option in my interface, and what did they want me walking into Minjun's group for? The drones moved overhead in slow patient arcs. Somewhere far from this beach, people watched a screen and calculated what I was worth. I intended to make that calculation expensive. I built the shelter before dark. The system's resource mapping tab had flagged everything I needed within a 100-meter radius: bamboo clusters, dry timber for framing, broad palm leaves for roofing, a flat rock formation that created 2 natural walls I could work with rather than against. 6 hours of work, not comfortable work. My hands weren't built for this and the system knew it, flagging the most efficient cutting angles, the most stable lashing patterns, compensating for what my body didn't know with what the interface did. By the time the light dropped, I had a structure. 3 walls, a roof with enough pitch to run rain, a raised sleeping surface from split bamboo that kept me off the wet ground. The stream 30 meters east ran clean enough to drink directly, but I filtered it anyway through layered cloth and charcoal ash from a test fire. Old habit from the resource mapping protocols I'd run professionally: assume contamination until proven otherwise. Current assets after day 1, shelter, water, food for roughly 40 hours, location unknown to the other 23 players. I opened the Player Profiles tab for the first time. 14 entries populated. The system had been building profiles passively from what the drones broadcast. Minjun's was the most detailed: former construction company director, filed for bankruptcy 18 months prior, debt load comparable to mine but larger. Physical confidence, organizational intelligence, low tolerance for variables he hadn't introduced himself. Threat rating, high. Engagement window, narrow. I closed the tab and slept 4 hours. They found me on day 2. Not Minjun's group, 2 independents who'd spent the first night exposed on the eastern beach and arrived at my position looking like it. The first was a woman who introduced herself only after she'd looked at the shelter, the water filter, and the stored food supply in that specific order. Ja. Former data analyst, she said, though the way she said former carried the same weight mine did: not a career change, a collapse. She was precise in movement and precise in language, the kind of person who doesn't say 3 words when 2 are sufficient. The second was a young man built like someone who'd worked physically his whole life. Tae Yang. He didn't explain his background. He looked at the shelter, looked at me, and said, "You built this alone?" When I confirmed it, he sat down next to the fire like he'd been invited, which I decided to interpret as he had been. I explained the system. Not everything, the fourth option anomaly I kept to myself, but the structure of it. Risk analysis, decision windows, threat assessment. Jia listened with the focused attention of someone cross-referencing what I said against her own interface data. Tae-yan listened the way people listen when they're deciding whether to trust the speaker rather than the content. "What's your interface?" I asked Jia. "Pattern recognition," she said. "Social and behavioral. I can tell when someone is performing versus deciding." She looked at me steadily. "You're deciding right now. Not performing. And him?" Taeyang nodded at me. Same. You're easier to read, you decide with your face. She said it without judgment. He didn't argue. I noted that he didn't argue. We agreed to a 3-person arrangement without calling it an alliance. The word carried contractual weight that none of us were ready to honor yet. Shared resources, shared information, shared perimeter. Reviewed nightly. I outlined the resource position. Combined food supply extended our window to 6 days if rationed. Water was stable. Shelter needed one additional wall on the northern face before the rain patterns the system had projected arrived in approximately 36 hours. Taeyang started on the wall without being asked. That was useful. On the morning of day 3, I noticed the gap in the perimeter logs. The system tracked movement near the shelter through thermal variance data captured by the interface's environmental sensors, a passive function I hadn't configured. It had built itself into the threat assessment protocol automatically. The log showed 4 exit events overnight. 3 mine. 1 that wasn't. I ran the timestamps. The 4th exit had occurred at 2:40. Duration, 11 minutes. Return, none. Sunu, the 4th player who'd arrived at the camp on day 2, quiet, unobtrusive, the kind of person rooms forget is in them, hadn't come back. I opened the Player Profiles tab. Sunu's entry had updated overnight. New data point under Alliance Activity, Resource Transfer Logged, Recipient, Mindjun's Group. Transfer Type, Coordinate Information. He'd sold our location for food. I sat with that information for a moment. Not with anger, with the specific flat feeling of a risk that had been calculated as acceptable and turned out not to be. I'd assessed Sunu as low initiative, low motivation, unlikely to act independently. I'd been wrong about the motivation part. Jia appeared next to me. She'd seen the log on her own interface. He sold us, she said. You trusted him for 3 days. I didn't trust him, I said. I assessed him as low risk. That's different. The outcome is the same. The outcome is the same, I agreed. The error is different. One I can correct. She looked at me for a moment. How long before Mindjun moves on the coordinates? I opened the decision engine. The system had already run the projection. Mindjun would act on fresh coordinates within 18 to 24 hours, most likely at night, most likely with his full group. 20 hours. Maybe less. 3 options appeared immediately. Option 1: relocate camp, lose all constructed assets, start from resource 0 in unknown terrain. Risk: relocation route may be monitored. Option 2: hold position and fortify, use terrain advantage, set perimeter alerts, prepare for confrontation. Risk: 3 players against 6 to 8. Option 3: preempt by feeding Mindjun false secondary coordinates, buys 48 hours, maintains current asset base. Risk: Mindjun identifies the deception, elevates threat rating permanently. I read all 3. Checked the formatting on each. Checked the response latency. All consistent. All genuine, every option carried a real cost. No 4th option this time. Interesting. We feed him false coordinates, I said. Taeyang had stopped working on the wall and was listening. You're going to lie to the man who already has our real location. I'm going to give him a more interesting location than ours. He moves on it, finds nothing, spends resources and time. We used the 48 hours to build the northern wall and move the food cache to a secondary position he doesn't have mapped. And when he figures it out? He will figure it out. That's already priced in. I closed the interface. The point isn't to fool him permanently. The point is to buy time we don't currently have. Taeyang looked at Jia. Jia was already looking at me. The false coordinates, she said. How do you send them without tracing back to you? I almost smiled. That's why I needed a pattern recognition analyst. She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then, I know 3 players who would pass information to Mindjun in exchange for resource credit. Any of them could carry it anonymously. Which one does it without asking what's in it for the messenger? She didn't hesitate. Hyun Woo. Eastern Beach, solo. He moves information because the movement itself makes him feel relevant. He won't ask for terms. I nodded. Find him. She left. Taeyang went back to the northern wall without comment. I sat with the resource tab open and ran the numbers forward 48 hours: food, water, construction requirements, threat probability curves, and the numbers held. Barely. But they held. The drones overhead adjusted their pattern slightly. Zooming in, probably. Viewer engagement metrics responding to the activity in our corner of the island. We were being interesting. Good, let them watch. The drone arrived at dawn on day 4. Not one of the broadcast units, smaller, quieter, a delivery model that dropped a sealed package at the camp's edge and was gone before anyone had fully processed what it was. The package was professional, vacuum-sealed food, a folding toolkit, basic medical supplies. Enough for 3 people for 2 days. No sender identification. Just a small card printed with a viewer engagement number and the word, "Enjoy." I didn't touch it for 4 minutes. The system ran its assessment automatically: contamination probability 0%. Tracking device probability 87%. Recommend, accept contents, destroy packaging. I opened the package, removed everything inside, and burned the outer casing in the card in the fire. Taeyang watched me do it without asking why. Ja watched and understood immediately. She'd reached the same conclusion from her pattern recognition interface before I'd explained anything. Sponsor, she said. Anonymous 1. They all are at this stage. She looked at the food. They're buying visibility. Our camp is getting screen time, which means someone with money decided we were worth investing in. And the tracker? Keeps us interesting. If the production team knows where we are at all times, they can direct other players toward us when the ratings need a conflict. She picked up one of the food packages, examined it, set it down. We're not players to them. We're a storyline. Taeyang had been quiet through this. Now, so we take the food and assume we're being watched more closely from today. We were always being watched, I said. Today we know the budget they're spending on it. We kept the food. The medical supplies. The tool kit. All useful, all clean. I noted the sponsor event in the threat assessment log and moved on. The attack on the southern camp happened that afternoon in full broadcast. I heard it before the system flagged it. Raised voices, movement sounds carrying on the wind from 200 meters south. The system updated the player position map, Minjun's group moving on a 3-person independent camp at the southern beach. Fast, organized, the movement pattern of people who'd done a threat assessment and concluded the math favored them. It did favor them. 6 against 3, resource advantage, positional advantage. The decision engine activated without me prompting it. Option 1, intervene, assist southern camp players, create conflict with Minjun directly. Viewer rating projected plus 55%. Risk, open war with dominant group, resources, and position compromised. Option 2, hold position, maintain camp security, allow event to resolve independently. Risk, viewer engagement drops, potential ally eliminated. Option 3, document and leverage, record event data via system interface, use as intelligence on Minjun's tactical patterns. No direct cost. I read all 3. Then I checked the formatting. Checked the response latency. Checked the border rendering on each option. Option 1 was wrong. Not wrong in the strategic sense, wrong in the technical sense. The M frequency was 0.3 seconds faster than the system's baseline. The text rendering had a marginally cleaner edge than options 2 and 3. I'd seen this exact signature once before on the 4th option at the landing beach, the one with no significant downsides. Fake. Someone had paid to insert option 1 into my interface because a rescue scene would generate enormous viewer numbers and the sponsor wanted the footage. The plus 55% viewer rating figure was probably accurate. The risk assessment was not the real cost of open confrontation with Minjun at this stage was not resources and position compromised. It was elimination within 72 hours. I closed the decision engine and stayed where I was. Taeyang had been watching the southern tree line. He turned to me, there's a person down there. Yes. You're sitting here. Yes. His jaw tightened. That doesn't bother you. It bothers me, I said. I'm doing it anyway. He looked at me for a long moment with the expression he made when he was deciding something. Then he turned back to the treeline and said nothing further. I noted that he stayed. Whatever he decided, it kept him in the camp. The sounds from the south resolved into silence 20 minutes later. An hour after the confrontation ended, the player from the southern camp, a young man I had no profile on, someone who'd stayed independent and off the system's radar, walked north along the beach. He stopped at Minjun's cache position. Minjun spoke to him for less than 2 minutes. The player nodded. Sat down inside the group's perimeter. Taeyang watched this from the camp's edge. Then he turned to me slowly. I waited. He didn't say anything. That was worse than if he had. He was going to end up there regardless, I said. Independent players in his resource position always consolidate toward the dominant group. The timeline was days, not weeks. You don't know that. The system projected it at 74% probability before the confrontation happened. I kept my voice flat. Not cold, flat. There's a difference. If I'd gone down there, I'd have taken physical risk, burned my neutral status with Minjun, and watched him join the group anyway from a worse position. Taeyang was quiet. I know how it looks, I said. I know you know, he said. That's the part that bothers me. He went back to work on the camp reinforcement. I stayed with the discomfort of being correctly understood and let it sit where it landed. That evening Jia raised the disinformation proposal. We have Hyanwa's channel, she said. We've already used it once for the false coordinates. We could build a systematic feed, false resource positions, false player locations, controlled chaos between the mid-tier groups. She laid it out precisely, the way she laid everything out. It buys us time, reduces threats before they reach our perimeter, keeps us out of direct confrontation. The system ran the analysis before I asked it to. Benefits, significant. Threat reduction across 6 projected conflict vectors, extended safe operation window, resource conservation. Cost, systematic data manipulation detected. Protocol, enhanced monitoring activated. Production intervention probability elevated 40%. Enhanced monitoring. The show's production team had tools beyond the standard drone coverage, interface interventions, sponsored option injections, scenario engineering. If they flagged us as active manipulators of the information environment, we became a target for their tools rather than just passive subjects of them. The sponsor who'd sent the morning package would pull funding. The fake options would come faster and more convincingly. We'd be playing against the game itself, not just the other players. Not yet, I said. Jia looked at me. The window for it closes as player numbers reduce. I know. Not yet. I closed the assessment tab. Right now the production team sees us as a developing storyline unpredictable enough to be interesting, contained enough to be manageable. The moment we start running systematic disinformation they reclassify us. From interesting to threatening, she said. From asset to problem. She considered that. Then, when? When we need it more than we need the cover, I said. We'll know the moment. She accepted this without argument. That was new. On day 2 she would have pushed further. Something in the camp's operational rhythm had shifted her calculus slightly. She trusted the framework even when she'd have built it differently. Taeyang came back from the perimeter check and sat down at the fire. He didn't ask what we'd been discussing. Minjun's group is running a night patrol now, he said. Eastern perimeter. 2 people, irregular intervals. I opened the threat assessment tab. Updated the patrol pattern. Ran the projection forward. They're not looking for us specifically, I said. They're mapping the island. Building a complete picture. How long before they have one? 48 hours. Maybe less if they move efficiently. So we have 2 days before he knows exactly where everything is. We have 2 days, I confirmed. We use them. The fire burned low between us. The drones made their slow circuits overhead, patient and indifferent, transmitting everything to screens we'd never see. Somewhere out there, people were watching us and deciding what the next move should be. I intended to make that decision before they did. Day 5 began with a data problem. I had logged 14 decision engine activations across 4 days. 7 genuine, verifiable through latency, formatting, the consistent presence of real costs in every option. For fake, the telltale M frequency, the cleaner text rendering, the options that were too convenient to be honest. 3 I hadn't been able to classify with confidence. 3 unknowns was 3 too many. The fake options had come faster after the Southern Camp event. Someone in the production chain had noted that I hadn't taken the intervention bait and adjusted. The next 2 attempts had been subtler, formatting closer to genuine, latency differences smaller. They were learning my detection pattern because I was the only player who'd consistently declined their inserted options. That made me interesting to viewers. That also made me a problem the sponsors wanted solved. I needed a better verification system than instinct and visual comparison. I needed a module. I sat at the camp's edge before the others were awake and worked through the architecture in my head, the way I'd once built risk assessment frameworks for logistics operations with 6 variables and 40 contingency branches. 3 layers of verification. First, technical signature M frequency, latency, border rendering. Already in use, increasingly unreliable as the production team improved their imitation. Second, structural logic, genuine options always distributed costs across all choices, no option was uniformly positive, the system's authentic design demanded that every path carried weight. Third, physiological response, the genuine system interfaced with something below conscious awareness, a mild pressure behind the eyes when an authentic window activated that I'd been registering for 4 days without naming. The fake options didn't produce it. They sat in the visual field without landing anywhere deeper, like reading a billboard rather than receiving information. 3 independent verification layers. Any option that failed 2 of 3 was fake. I needed Jia for the second layer and Taeyang for the third. I explained the framework over the morning meal. Jia listened with her interface active, cross-referencing what I described against her own pattern recognition data. She'd noticed the structural logic element independently. Her behavioral analysis had flagged that genuine decision windows produced a different cognitive load than the inserted ones, something about the way they distributed uncertainty across all outcomes rather than concentrating it selectively toward a single desired choice. The fake ones want a specific outcome, she said. The genuine ones want a decision. The architecture is different because the purpose is different. Exactly. Can you log every option structure going forward? Word-level detail. Already doing it, she said. Day 1. I looked at her. You noticed something was wrong with the options on day 2, she said. I noticed on day 1. I just didn't know what I was noticing yet. She set down her food. The pattern was there. The language in the fake options is slightly more persuasive than the genuine ones. Small difference, single word choices, sentence rhythm. But genuine risk analysis language is neutral. It describes, it doesn't suggest. The fake ones suggest. Because they were written by someone who wanted a result. And the genuine ones were written by a system that doesn't care which option you take, only that you take one with full information. She paused. Whoever is inserting the fake windows, they're not bad writers. But they're not neutral. You can feel the preference in the syntax. That was more than I'd built into the framework. I added it as a 4th sublayer under structural logic and told her so. She accepted this without visible satisfaction. It wasn't about credit, it was about the module working. Taeyang's contribution took longer to extract because he didn't think in analytical frameworks and didn't pretend to. I asked him to describe what he felt physically when the interface activated. He looked at me like I'd suggested something unreasonable. You want me to describe feelings about a computer. I want you to describe a physical response to a stimulus. That's diagnostic data. He thought about it seriously, which was what he did with most things once he'd decided to engage. The thinking was visible on his face, not slow, just deliberate, like a man measuring twice before he cut. Genuine ones, he said finally. There's pressure. Here. He touched his temple. Like someone turned up the volume on something that was already playing. You feel it land. And fake ones? Flat. Like reading a sign. He paused. Actually, not even that. Like seeing a sign in a window from a moving car. You register it, but it doesn't ask anything from you. That's the third layer, I said. He looked at Jia. He's been building this since day one, hasn't he? Since before day one, she said. He built the framework before he had the data. Taeyang looked at me with an expression I was beginning to recognize, not admiration exactly, something more complicated. The expression of a person recalibrating what they'd initially assumed about someone and finding the recalibration unsettling in ways they hadn't expected. What do you need me to do? He said. Every time I run a decision engine activation, I need your read. The physical one. One word, real or flat. You don't need to see the content. You want me as an instrument. I want you as a layer of verification that doesn't share my blind spots, I said. I built the first two layers from my own analytical framework. If they're imitating my framework, they can eventually fool both. You're reading something different. Something they can't imitate yet because they don't know it exists. He considered this. You're saying my gut is a security feature. I'm saying your gut is currently more sophisticated than their forgery. I paused. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up his water and drank and set it down and said, fine. We tested the module for the first time that afternoon. Jun sent a negotiator. Heijin arrived at the northern camp's outer perimeter alone, hands visible, moving with the deliberate transparency of someone who had been told to appear unthreatening and had decided that actually being unthreatening was the most efficient execution of that instruction. Mid-30s, measured, unhurried. The practiced calm of a man who had been in difficult rooms before and had learned that stillness was more useful than armor. He sat when I indicated the fire. Accepted water. Looked at the camp layout with the quick professional assessment of someone who cataloged environments automatically. Then he stated his terms without preamble. Jun wants a non-aggression window. 7 days. In exchange, information on the Western Group's resource position. Specifically their water source location. The decision engine activated. I ran the module simultaneously. Jia was 3 meters away, positioned to observe my face without appearing to. Taeyang was working on the camp's northern reinforcement within earshot. Technical signature, latency normal, within 2 milliseconds of baseline. Formatting consistent across all options. Border rendering standard. First layer, passed. Structural logic, option 1 accepted the deal at full terms, cost was intelligence value transferred permanently, dependency on Jun's continued good faith, tactical position partially exposed. Option 2 declined entirely, maintained full independence, elevated immediate threat rating significantly. Option 3 counteroffered partial information only, shorter non-aggression window, preserved more leverage at the cost of reduced good faith. All 3 options carry genuine weight distributed across all choices. No option was clean. Fourth sublayer, language neutral, descriptive, no syntactic preference for any outcome. Second layer, passed. Physiological check, pressure on activation. Present. Landing. Not flat. I looked at Taeyang without turning my head fully. He was facing the northern wall. His hand had paused on the material he was working with for exactly 2 seconds. Then he resumed. Real. Genuine window. All 3 options authentic. No insertion. Which meant Jun had sent an honest negotiator with honest terms. He wasn't manipulating this interaction, he was conducting actual business. Either he assessed us as worth respecting, or he assessed us as low enough threat that the production cost of manipulation wasn't justified. Both readings pointed the same direction. 7 days non-aggression, I said to Heijin. We don't have precise data on the Western Group's water source. We have movement patterns and a probable zone. I can provide those. Heijin studied me for a moment. Jun will verify the accuracy. He should. That's good operational practice. The corner of Heijin's mouth moved slightly. Not a smile, an acknowledgement. He stood, accepted the information I relayed, and left with the same unhurried professionalism he'd arrived with. Taeyang waited until the sound of Heijin's movement had fully faded into the treeline. You just handed Minjun another group. I handed him a location he'd have found in 48 hours of active mapping, I said. In exchange for 7 days where his group doesn't move against us. The Western group's problem was already determined. Ours wasn't. Taeyang was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of someone who understood the logic and hadn't finished deciding how they felt about it. I don't like it, he said. You told me that already. I'm telling you again. Noted again. I looked at him directly. Does it make sense? He held the silence for 3 full seconds. Yes. That's enough. He went back to the wall. Jia came and sat beside me at the fire. She said nothing. She was running her own assessment of the Heijin interaction and I let her run it without interrupting. After 2 minutes she said, the module worked. First clean test. He was genuine. Heijin, I mean. Not performing. He came with a real offer because Minjun made a real calculation. She paused. Minjun is more rational than his opening day performance suggested. Rational people are more dangerous than aggressive ones, I said. Aggression is predictable. Rationality adapts. She absorbed this. Then the 7 days aren't safety. They're a window to prepare for what he builds next. Exactly. The system responded that night. Not through the decision engine. Directly, a line of text appearing in the threat assessment tab without being prompted by any activation sequence, sitting there like a message left in an empty room. Warning, unauthorized access detected. Consciousness variables will be adjusted. I read it 3 times. Consciousness variables. Not system parameters. Not interface configuration. The language was specific and deliberate, either generated by a system sophisticated enough to understand the weight of that phrase, or written by the people behind the system who understood it perfectly and chose it intentionally. Both possibilities were equally uncomfortable. I screenshotted it in my memory, logged the exact text, the tab it appeared in, the time, the absence of any triggering activation sequence. Then I closed the tab and lay down on the sleeping platform and looked at the shelter ceiling. Taeyang was asleep. Jia was on watch outside. The island made its night sounds around the camp, wind in the upper canopy, water moving in the stream to the east, the distant hum of a drone on a long circuit somewhere north. I closed my eyes. The dream was my office. Not as I remembered it as it had actually been. Detail perfect, the specific crack in the plaster above the east window that I hadn't consciously registered in 3 years of sitting beneath it. The contract documents on my desk were exact reproductions, specific clause numbers, specific margin notes in my own handwriting, specific coffee ring on the upper right corner of page 4. I had not remembered the coffee ring. The system had. It had retrieved it from the stored data of my own memory, from the sections I didn't access voluntarily, the background register that records everything without your permission. And it was showing me that it had access to those rooms. Not as a threat, exactly. As a demonstration. Look how much of you we have. The dream moved forward in real time through the signing of those contracts every minute of that afternoon, every word of the conversation with the firm's director, the specific quality of afternoon light through the window and the way it made the signature line on page 12 difficult to read. I had not remembered the light. The system had remembered it for me and was now playing it back with the patience of something that had been waiting a long time to show me what it knew. I sat inside the reconstruction and understood that I was being mapped. Not just analyzed, mapped. The system wasn't studying my decisions anymore. It was studying what I cared about, what I'd lost, what I was afraid of repeating. Building not a profile of my behavior but a model of my interior architecture. The place where the decisions came from before they became decisions. The signing finished. The director shook my hand. I watched my own face in the reconstruction, the specific expression of a man who had committed to something and already felt the first intimation that it was wrong, suppressed immediately because suppressing it was the only way to continue. The system had found that moment. That specific suppression. I woke up before dawn with the complete clarity of someone who had just been told something important in a language they weren't supposed to understand. Jia was at the fire. She looked at me when I sat up. "You look like you were interrogated all night." I said. "By myself, from the outside." "The system?" "It found my memories. Specific ones, things I don't consciously retain. It reconstructed an afternoon from 3 years ago with details I couldn't have produced voluntarily." I sat fully upright. "It's not analyzing my decisions anymore. It's mapping the source of them. What I care about. What I'm afraid of becoming again." She was quiet with this for a moment. "To predict you more accurately. To find the lever," I said. "Every person has a specific fear the system can press to produce a predictable response. It's building toward mine." I opened the threat assessment tab and added a new category: System Intrusion Memory Layer. Access pattern monitoring initiated. The warning last night wasn't a threat. It was notification. It wanted me to know it could do this. Why? Because fear of the capability is more controlling than the capability itself. If I spend my energy worrying about what it might find, I stop spending energy on what I'm actually building. I looked at the fire. It wants me reactive. So I'm not going to be reactive. What are you going to be? Observant. I closed the tab. Every time it accesses the memory layer, it leaves a trace in the activation pattern, a slightly different latency signature, a different pressure quality. If I log those traces carefully enough, I start to understand the access architecture. Which means I start to understand how it's built. Jia looked at me with the expression she used when a behavioral assessment resolved into a result she found both analytically interesting and personally unsettling. "You're using your own subconscious as bait," she said. "I'm using my own subconscious as a sensor array," I said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" I thought about the coffee ring on page 4. The afternoon light through the office window. The expression on my own face at the moment I signed something I already knew was wrong. "Ask me when it works," I said. She turned back to the fire. Outside the perimeter, Taiyang's footsteps marked the end of his sleep cycle, the sound of someone large moving carefully in the pre-dawn dark. The drones were already active overhead, their hum a constant frequency the ear had learned to treat as silence. Day 6 was beginning. The module was built. The system had shown its hand. Somewhere in the gap between those two facts was the next move, not obvious yet, but present. The way a solution is present in a problem before you've found it. Waiting for the framework to catch up. I opened the threat assessment tab and started logging day 8. 14 players remaining. I ran the numbers before breakfast. Minjun controlled the island center with 7 players, the primary cache, and the only confirmed freshwater source in the southern half. Our group, 3 people, had the best resource efficiency on the island, the diagnostic module, and a 7-day non-aggression window with 4 days left on it. The third independent cluster, led by a woman named Yongji, had 4 players, a defensible eastern position, and a problem: they were running out of food and Minjun knew it. 14 players. 3 functional groups. 1 inevitable collision. The math didn't favor waiting. Yongji found us first. She arrived at the northern camp perimeter alone, no escort, no weapons visible, the deliberate vulnerability of someone making a calculated offer of trust. She was compact, precise in movement, with the particular stillness of a person who had learned to be underestimated and had decided to stop correcting people about it. She sat at the fire and looked at me directly. "You've been quiet for 8 days, she said. "Everyone else has been visible. You've been invisible." She paused. "That's either incompetence or strategy. You don't look incompetent. What do you want?" I said. "The same thing you want." Minjun removed from the equation. She looked at Jia, then Taeyang, then back to me. 7 against 7. Clean math. The decision engine activated before she finished the sentence. I ran the module. Technical signature, latency normal, formatting clean, border standard. Structural logic, option 1 accepted. Full alliance risk was post-Minjun vulnerability, Yongji's group outgunned ours physically 3-1, survival probability in the final phase dropping to 34%. Option 2 declined, maintained safety, surrendered the best window for removing Manjun, resource clock continued running against us. Option 3 negotiated partial terms, shared operation, separate command structures, dissolution clause after primary objective achieved. All three options carried genuine costs distributed evenly. The language was neutral. No option was clean. Physiological check, pressure on activation. Landing. Present. Taeyang, from behind me at the camp wall, gave the single word I'd asked for, real. Genuine window. Honest terms from an honest player who had done her own math and arrived at the same conclusion I had. I looked at Yongji. What's your resource position? I said. She didn't hesitate. 4 days. 3 if we're inefficient. Manjun knows that. Manjun is counting on it. And after Manjun? I said. What happens to the alliance then? She held my eyes. That's a problem for after Manjun. Which was the most honest thing anyone had said to me in 8 days. She wasn't pretending the alliance had a future. She was proposing a transaction with a defined scope and letting me decide whether the transaction was worth the terms. I looked at Jia. She gave a micro nod, behavioral red confirmed. Yongji was not performing, she was deciding. I looked at Taeyang. He shrugged once. His version of endorsement. We take Manjun's water source, I said. Not his people, not his cash. The water source. Without it, the center position becomes indefensible. He moves or he loses players to attrition. Yongji considered this. Why the water source specifically? Because capturing a resource forces a decision. Destroying his base forces a fight. I want him making a decision under pressure, not fighting under pressure. A cornered group is more dangerous than a displaced one. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you've been planning this since before I arrived. I've been planning this since day 2, I said. I just needed a second group to make the geometry work. Something shifted in her expression. Not warmth, respect. Which was more useful? When, she said. Tonight, I said. While the non-aggression window is still active. I want to be precise about the operation because the precision is what made it work. Manjun's non-aggression window covered direct conflict between his group and mine. It said nothing about information. It said nothing about Yongji. And it said nothing about what happened if Manjun moved his group away from the water source voluntarily because a third party had made that position untenable. I spent the afternoon building the deception in 3 layers. The first layer was Hyunwoo Jia's information channel, the player on the eastern beach who moved data because movement made him feel relevant. Through Hyunwoo I passed Manjun's group a set of coordinates, Yongji's base location, specific inaccurate, with a note that she was planning a night movement and her camp would be temporarily underdefended. Manjun would verify the coordinates, they were real, which was the point. The note about the night movement was fiction, but attached to accurate coordinates, fiction travels as fact. The second layer was positioning. Yongji's group didn't move toward Manjun. They moved southeast, perpendicular to both camps, visible to the broadcast drones, clearly not heading anywhere near the center. If Manjun's scouts reported on Yongji's movement, they'd see a group going the wrong direction for an attack. The fabricated tip about her base being underdefended would look even more credible. The third layer was timing. Manjun would move on Yongji's base at night, that was his pattern, the system had logged it twice. When he moved, the center position would be reduced to 2 or 3 people on watch. Yongji's group would take the water source in the window between Manjun's departure and his return. Our group's role, nothing visible. We stayed in the northern camp, within our non-aggression terms, entirely clean. I explained the full operation to Taeyang and Jia that afternoon. Taeyang listened to all of it. Then, you're using Yongji as the hand and keeping yours clean. Yes. And Yongji knows this? Yongji agreed to take the water source. She didn't ask how I was going to clear the path. I paused. She's smart enough to know I was going to do something. She's smart enough not to ask what. That's a lot of smart people not asking questions. That's how functional alliances work, Ja said, from the camp's edge. Everyone takes the piece they need and doesn't examine the pieces they don't. Tae-yeon looked at her. Then at me. And the part where Yongji's group is now our biggest threat the moment Minjun is out? Also priced in, I said. And already being worked on. He didn't ask how. That was new. A week ago he'd have pushed. The camp's operational discipline had changed him slightly, the way sustained work changes people, smoothing the edges that friction wears on. He trusted the framework even when he couldn't see the full structure. Tell me what I need to do tonight, he said. Minjun moved at 2300 hours. The system tracked his group's departure from the center position, 7 players, moving southeast in the coordinated pattern of an organized strike team. The fabricated coordinates had worked exactly as designed. He was moving on Yongji's base with his full group, which meant the water source had 2 people on watch in 4 hours before he returned. Yongji's group reached the water source at 2340. I know this because Zhao was monitoring the player position map from our camp and relaying updates in a steady, quiet voice, the same tone she used for everything. Data is data regardless of what it means. Yongji's group at perimeter. Water source watch engaging. Contact, non-physical, they're showing resource capacity. A pause. Watch is retreating. Water source position transferred. 20 minutes. No injuries. 2 players from Minjun's watch rotation walking away from a position they couldn't hold with 2 people against 4. I sat at the camp's edge and tracked the player map and felt something that wasn't quite satisfaction. Satisfaction implied the outcome had been uncertain. This was closer to confirmation. The math had held. At 2:15 Minjun returned to the center position. I watched his group's movement on the map slow as they registered the water source gone. Then stop. Then the particular stillness of a position map when people aren't moving because they're having a conversation that determines what happens next. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Then Minjun's group began moving again, not toward Yongji's position, not toward ours. West. Toward the island's western quadrant, where the system's mapping showed a secondary water source I had known about since day 3 and had chosen not to use for exactly this reason. He was relocating. Not fighting. Displacing. The center of the island was open. He found me the next morning. Not his group, just him, alone, which required a specific kind of confidence or a specific kind of anger that had burned down to something cold and functional. He walked to the northern camp perimeter and stopped there and looked at me across it. I walked out to meet him. Not because I owed him the courtesy, because standing inside a fence while someone stands outside it is a statement I didn't need to make. We stood 2 meters apart in the morning light. The drones adjusted their positions overhead. Somewhere in a building far from this island, people were watching 2 men stand in a clearing and deciding what this moment was worth in viewer metrics. Minjun looked at me for a long time. The expression of a man reconstructing an event backward from its outcome to its origin, finding each step, understanding the architecture of it. You used my own non-aggression window, he said. Not an accusation, a statement of fact, almost admiring in its flatness. I operated within its terms. You sent me to an empty base. I passed information I received to a channel you had access to. What you did with it was your operational decision. He was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved, not away, just processing. The coordinates were real. The movement report was fabricated. You attached fiction to fact, so I carry it myself. That's an accurate reconstruction. He looked at me. Really looked, the way people look when they're updating a fundamental assessment rather than confirming an existing one. You're smarter than you look, he said. Everyone is smarter than they look, I said. Nobody told you that until now. Something in his expression changed. Not anger, something more complex than anger, the specific feeling of a person who has been beaten by a better version of the game they thought they were playing. He stood with it for a moment, not collapsing it into something simpler, actually holding its full weight. Then he turned and walked back toward the western treeline. No threats. No promises. Just a man walking away from a position he no longer held, toward a position he'd have to rebuild from. The system updated the player threat assessment. Mine June, threat rating reduced. Resource position, depleted. Alliance structure, dissolved. Engagement probability, low, 72 hours. I watched him go until the tree lean took him. Taeyang appeared beside me. Did he threaten you? No. Did you expect him to? I expected exactly what happened, I said. Rational people don't threaten when threatening costs more than it recovers. He's rebuilding, not retaliating. For now. For now, I agreed. 3 players from Yongji's group had watched the exchange from 50 meters away, far enough for deniability, close enough to see everything clearly. When I returned to camp, they were still there, visible at the tree lean edge. Ja noticed them before I said anything. They've been there since Mine June arrived. I know. They saw the whole conversation. I know. She turned to look at me directly. They understand now what kind of player you are. What that means for them when the alliance expires. Yes. Does Yongji? Yongji understood before she sat at our fire, I said. That's why she came alone. She was making her own assessment of how much she'd need to know about her exposure before she committed. And what did she decide? She decided the exposure was worth the transaction. I looked at the 3 figures at the tree lean edge. The question isn't whether she knows. It's how long she waits before she acts on it. Ja was quiet for a moment. So the alliance ends when she decides the risk of waiting exceeds the benefit of the partnership. Which means our window is defined by how quickly we can make ourselves more useful to her than we are threatening. I paused. We have time. Not much. But enough. Enough for what? I opened the threat assessment tab and looked at the player map. 14 players on day 8. Now 12, with Minejun's group reduced to fragments. The final phase was closer than it looked. The system would start narrowing options soon, resource constraints tightening, player numbers dropping, the island's geometry compressing toward a single point. The diagnostic module was built. Mine June was displaced. The alliance was active and temporary and already counting down. And somewhere in the production chain, the people who had been inserting fake options into my interface had just watched me dismantle the island's dominant group without breaking a single rule, without taking a single fabricated option, without giving them a single piece of footage they could use to make me look like something I wasn't. The drones overhead held their positions. I looked at the player map for a long moment. Enough to finish this on our terms, I said. Not theirs. The cost arrived that evening. Not from Yongji. From a direction I hadn't fully weighted. Taeyang found me at the water cache after the dinner rotation and stood with the particular stillness he used when he'd been thinking about something for several hours and had finally decided to say it. The Western group, he said. The 3 people Mine June had on the southern perimeter before we moved on the water source. Where are they now? I opened the player map. 3 markers, western quadrant, holding a loose cluster formation near the coast. Not with Minejun's main fragment separate, independent. Players who'd been inside his structure and had decided, when the structure collapsed, not to follow him into his next one. Floating, I said. Unattached. They've been watching our camp since this morning, Taeyang said. I've seen 2 of them on the eastern ridge twice. Different times, same position. I ran the assessment. 3 unattached players with knowledge of Minejun's operational patterns, watching our camp with enough consistency to indicate intent. Not immediately threatening, they didn't have the resource base for a direct move. But information was a resource too, and they had enough of ours to make them interesting to anyone who wanted to buy it. Including Yongji. The alliance, Taeyang said slowly, working through it. If Yongji picks up those 3 players, her group goes from 4 to 7. And she already knows our position, our water source, our operational patterns. He paused. She wouldn't need to wait for the alliance to expire. She'd just be stronger than us. Yes, I said. You already knew this. I knew the possibility. The confirmation is from you, just now. He looked at the map. So what do we do? I thought about it with the full weight it deserved. 3 options built themselves automatically: approach the floating players first and absorb them before Yongji did, accept the vulnerability and accelerate our own timeline before the numbers shifted, or move against Yongji preemptively while the alliance still gave us proximity. None of them were clean. The decision engine didn't activate. This wasn't a system decision, this was the kind of problem the system left to me because it sat at the intersection of too many human variables to model cleanly. People who had just lost their structure. A woman who was smart enough to see the same board I was seeing. A timeline that was compressing from 2 directions simultaneously. We don't absorb the floating players, I said. If we approach them, they'll read it as recruitment, which tells them they have leverage, which raises their price and makes them more interesting to Yongji as a countermove. Then we do nothing? We make ourselves more visible than we've been, I said. Operational visibility, resource visibility. We let the floating players see that our position is stronger than Yongji's long-term, better water, better shelter, more stable alliance internal structure. We let them make the calculation themselves. Tae-yeon looked at me. You want them to choose us without us asking. I want them to arrive at the conclusion that we're the safer long-term position. That's different from recruiting and different from ignoring. I closed the map. People who've just watched their structure collapse aren't looking for the strongest group. They're looking for the most stable one. And we're stable? I looked at the camp. The water channel we'd built on day 3, still running. The food cache, organized and logged. The shelter, solid, dry, built to last. Jia's perimeter logs, Taeyang's carrying rotations, the operational rhythm that had built itself over 8 days from 3 people who'd had no reason to trust each other and had found one anyway. We're the most stable thing on this island, I said. We just need to make sure they can see it. Tae-yeon absorbed this. Then, with the bluntness that was his most consistent quality, and Yongji? While we're being visible and stable and letting floating players make good decisions, what is she doing? The same thing we are, I said. The same thing everyone still standing on this island is doing. Which is running out of time to wait and see. The fire burned between us. The drones held their evening positions, their hum of frequency the ear had long since learned to absorb. Somewhere on the western coast, Minjun was rebuilding from nothing with a fraction of what he'd had, doing the only thing a rational player could do after losing, adapting, recalculating, waiting for someone else to make the next mistake. 12 players. Day 8. The island had started large and was getting smaller every day, not physically, but geometrically. The space between the remaining players was compressing, the viable positions narrowing, the options that had existed on day 1 disappearing one by one as resources concentrated and alliances hardened and the production team's patience for slow development exhausted itself into engineered conflicts. The diagnostic module was built and tested. Minjun was displaced and rebuilding. Yongji was an active alliance partner with a countdown neither of us was pretending didn't exist. 3 floating players were watching our camp from the eastern ridge and doing their own math. And somewhere in the interface, quiet since the previous night, the system was learning the architecture of my memories while I logged its access patterns and waited for the picture to resolve. I looked at the player map one more time before closing the threat assessment tab. 12 markers. Each one a person who had lost something significant before stepping off a helicopter onto a beach. Each one running their own calculation, their own interface, their own version of the same desperate arithmetic. The interesting ones survive, the man in the white jacket had said. I was beginning to understand that interesting wasn't a quality you performed for the cameras. It was what happened when a person stopped pretending the situation was other than it was and started working with the full weight of what it actually required. Day 9 tomorrow. I intended to be ready for it. Day 10. 8 players remaining. The dreams had become nightly since the warning message. Not random, structured, sequential, each one picking up where the previous had ended, as if the system was running a continuous excavation across my sleep cycles rather than isolated intrusions. Night 1 had been the contract signing. Night 2 was earlier, the first conversation with the debt collector, a man named Park Sungo whose specific face I had not consciously retained but which the system rendered in perfect detail, the precise arrangement of his features, the way he'd set his coffee cup on the table between us and not moved it for the entire 40 minutes. Night 3 was my wife. Not an argument, not a dramatic moment, the specific ordinary morning 3 weeks before she left, the two of us in the kitchen, her reading something on her phone and me reading the logistics data I brought home every evening because bringing it home made me feel like I was still working even when I wasn't. The quality of silence between us in that kitchen. The particular way she held her cup without drinking from it for several minutes. Details I had buried because they were too specific to be comfortable and too accurate to be dismissed. The system had found every suppression and was methodically unsuppressing them. I logged each intrusion in the threat assessment tab with clinical language because clinical language was the only tool I had against material that was not clinical. Memory access event, subject, personal relationship, pre-collapse period. Access signature, latency elevated 0.4 milliseconds above baseline, pressure quality softer than decision engine activations, duration 4.2 hours subjective. The logging helped. Not because it changed anything but because it gave the material a container, and a container made it manageable even when the contents were not. Ja had stopped asking how I looked in the mornings. She'd moved to simply noting, another one. And I would confirm and we would move on to the day's operational requirements, which was the correct response. The island didn't pause for interior weather. But the system was getting better at it. On day 10 the decision engine produced an activation I couldn't verify. I ran all 4 layers simultaneously. Technical signature, latency normal. Border rendering standard. Physiological response, pressure present. Structural logic, all 3 options carried apparent costs. Apparent. The language was neutral. The formatting was clean. The pressure was there. And yet, something was wrong in a way I couldn't locate with any of the module's existing instruments. A wrongness that existed below the measurable layers, in the register where Taeyang's gut check lived, except Taeyang gave me real on this one too, which meant either we were both wrong or the system had learned to imitate the physiological response as well as the visual signature. Both possibilities were bad. I closed the activation without selecting any option and sat with the specific discomfort of a security system that had just failed its first real test. Jia noticed. She always noticed. Module failure? Inconclusive, I said. I couldn't find the forgery but I couldn't confirm authenticity either. What do you do with inconclusive? Nothing. An option I can't verify is an option I don't take. I paused. The problem is if they produce enough inconclusive activations they don't need me to take the fake ones. They just need to paralyze the decision process. She understood immediately. Decision paralysis is as useful to them as a wrong decision. More useful in some ways. A wrong decision produces visible consequences they can manage. Paralysis produces inaction, which means the situation evolves without my input and they can shape the evolution. She was quiet for a moment. So the module needs a 5th layer. The module needs a completely different architecture, I said. They've learned the 4 layers. They've had 10 days of data on how I verify. The module worked when they were imitating imperfectly. It doesn't work when they're imitating well. Then what? I looked at the player map. 8 players. 4 days left on the non-aggression window with Mindjun's rebuild fragment, 3 people now. The floating players had not come to us and had not gone to Yongji. They'd formed their own microcluster in the northwest quadrant, which was a decision I respected even though it complicated the geometry. Yongji's group was intact, positioned well, watching our camp with the patient attention of an entity that had decided to be ready rather than early. The module was built to detect fakes, I said. That's a defensive architecture. It assumes the genuine system is reliable and the problem is external contamination. I closed the map. But the system has been inside my memory layer for 5 nights. It knows how I think. It can now generate options that aren't fake options that are genuine system outputs shaped by everything it's learned about my decision patterns. Options that are technically authentic but functionally designed to route me toward a preferred outcome. Jia stared at me. It's not inserting fake options anymore. It's generating real options that point where the sponsors want me to go, because it now knows me well enough to make that look like neutral analysis. I paused. The forgery was the early stage. This is more sophisticated. The system isn't being manipulated from outside anymore. It's been educated. By you. By me. The silence between us had a specific quality, the silence of two people who had just understood that the threat had changed shape while they were busy defending against the previous shape. Jia left to check the eastern perimeter. I sat alone at the camp center and opened the memory access log I'd been building for 5 days. 41 intrusion events. Each one logged with access signature, duration, subject matter, and the specific emotional register the system had targeted within the memory. I read them in sequence, looking for the pattern the way I'd once read logistics data, looking for the variance that indicated systemic failure rather than isolated error. The pattern was there. The system hadn't been accessing memories randomly. It had been accessing them in a specific order, moving backward chronologically from the collapse, through the contract, through the deteriorating marriage, through the early career, towards something earlier. Each night's intrusion went slightly further back. The coffee ring. The debt collector's face. The kitchen morning. The previous pattern suggested the next intrusion would reach further back than the collapse, back into something that predated the professional failure and the financial failure and everything I'd consciously identified as the source of what I'd become. The system was looking for the original architecture. The fear that had been there before the specific fears I'd built my professional competency to manage. And if it found it, if it reached whatever was underneath the identifiable layers, it would have a lever I'd never built a defense for, because you can't defend against something you've never consciously acknowledged. I closed the log. Opened the diagnostic module and started rebuilding it from the architecture up. Not a detection system this time. A different design entirely, not looking for forgeries, not verifying authenticity. Instead, a pattern interrupt. The system accessed my memory layer during sleep, which meant it required a sustained low awareness state to run the intrusion protocol. If I could build a monitoring layer that activated a disruption signal at the first indicator of memory access, the 0.4 milliseconds latency spike, the softer pressure signature, I could wake myself at the access threshold before the system reached the target memory. Not a solution. A delay tactic. But a delay was what I needed, enough nights of interrupted access to prevent the system from reaching the deeper layer before I understood what was down there myself. I worked on the rebuild for 3 hours. The interface was responsive in ways it hadn't been earlier in the process. The system had given me tools I hadn't initially had access to, unlocked through the ongoing engagement, which was its own kind of irony. The deeper I dug into its architecture, the more capable it made me. It was either overconfident or it was running a longer game than I was tracking. I noted both possibilities and kept building. The interruption protocol activated for the first time on the night of day 10. I felt it land, the 0.4 milliseconds spike, the softer pressure, and the module fired its disruption signal, and I came awake in the dark with the specific clarity of a person who has been pulled back from a threshold. The shelter's ceiling. The sound of the island at night. Taeyang's breathing on the other platform, steady and deep. The system was at the edge of something. I'd felt the shape of it before the interrupt pulled me back, a memory earlier than the collapse, earlier than the career, something from a period I genuinely didn't access voluntarily. The system had been one intrusion away from it. The interrupt had worked. I lay in the dark for a long time and thought about what was down there that the system wanted badly enough to spend 5 consecutive nights digging toward it. The thing I'd built a successful career on top of and never looked directly at. The original fear. I knew what it was. I had always known. I'd just never given it a clean name because naming things makes them available for other people to use. The system had been trying to name it for me. I sat up quietly in the dark and opened the threat assessment tab and added a single line to the memory access log. Access attempt, deeper layer. Interrupt successful. Target identified by proximity. Do not log target specifics. Documentation creates vulnerability. Then I closed the tab and looked at the shelter entrance and the pale pre-dawn light beginning to show at its edges. The module had held. Barely. Once. The system would adjust its approach for the next attempt. It always did. I had one night, maybe 2, before it found a way around the interrupt protocol. Which meant I needed to reach the deeper layer myself before it did, on my own terms, with my own framing, so that when the system finally arrived there it found a room I'd already been in rather than one I'd never opened. The hardest kind of preparation. The kind that required no tools and no interface and no module. Just honesty in the dark, before the island woke up. I stayed with it until the light came fully. Jia was at the fire when I came out. She looked at me. The morning assessment she ran on my face every day, the behavioral read that had become as routine as the water check. Different this morning, she said. The interrupt worked. And the system was close enough that I felt what it was looking for. She waited. I know what it wants, I said. It's been building toward the same target for 5 nights. The original thing. The one underneath everything else. Can it use it against you? I thought about the kitchen morning. My wife's cup. The contract signing. The coffee ring. All of it excavated and rendered and displayed with the patience of something that had unlimited time and limited only by how deep I'd buried the material it needed. It can try, I said. But I've spent 10 days watching it work. I know the architecture now. The access signature, the pressure quality, the latency profile. I looked at the fire. It's been studying me. But I've been studying it back. She looked at me for a long moment with the expression she used when a behavioral assessment resolved cleanly. You're going to let it reach the bottom. On my terms, I said. Not its. There's a difference? There's everything, I said. The camp was waking around us. Taiyang's footsteps inside the shelter, the sound of the water channel running its steady eastern flow, a drone activating on the northern perimeter and beginning its morning circuit. Day 11 was beginning. 8 players. The Alliance countdown running. The system rebuilding its access approach in whatever processing layer it used for that work. The island compressing its geometry toward the final phase. And underneath all of it, the deepest layer, the original fear, the thing I'd been carrying so long I'd stopped noticing the weight. I was going to need it before this was over. Not as a vulnerability. As a weapon, day 11. 5 players remaining. I ran the count before dawn. Our group, 3. Yongji's group, intact at 3 after one of her players had been eliminated overnight. Resource index hit 0, the system had flagged it and production had removed him quietly, the way production removed people when the event wasn't dramatic enough for broadcast. The Northwest microcluster, gone. All 3 floating players eliminated in a single 12-hour window, resources exhausted, engagement metrics too low to sustain. Minjun, alone, Western Quadrant, resource position critical. 5 players. The island had compressed to its final geometry. The non-aggression window with Minjun's fragment had expired at midnight. The alliance with Yongji was technically still active and functionally already over. She had 3 players and we had 3 players, and the math said one of us was going to move first. The question wasn't whether. The question was when, and whether when could be made to coincide with something more useful than a direct confrontation. We had a 34% chance of surviving. I opened the diagnostic module and looked at the accumulated data from 11 days of decision engine activations, memory intrusion events, fake option signatures, and the rebuilt interrupt protocol that had held for 3 consecutive nights. 47 events logged. 312 data points. The access pattern architecture mapped with enough resolution that I could now predict the system's next move before it made it, not perfectly, but close enough. Close enough was what I needed. The core access window. The theoretical entry point I'd been building toward since the night I'd understood the system wasn't just a tool but an architecture, one with a source, a design logic, a point of origin that could in principle be reached if you understood the access pattern well enough and could create the conditions for simultaneous interface saturation. I looked at the player map. 5 players. 5 active interfaces. If all 5 activated simultaneously under genuine high-stakes pressure, the system's processing load would spike. Every interface running full decision engine protocol at maximum throughput, the memory access layer, the threat assessment layer, the resource mapping layer, all of them operating at peak simultaneously. In that window, the architecture would be exposed at its seams. The places where the genuine system connected to the production overlay, where the authentic risk analysis engine interfaced with the sponsored insertion mechanism, where the core logic lived underneath everything that had been built on top of it. That was the entry point. I needed to create a situation that produced genuine maximum pressure activations in all 5 remaining players at the same moment. I needed Taeyang to walk into the center of the island alone. I told him at first light. All of it, the core theory, the access window, the simultaneous activation requirement, what I needed him to do and why I needed him specifically to do it. I didn't soften the exposure element. He deserved the full picture. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, looking at the camp around him, the shelter, the water channel, the operational infrastructure that 11 days of work had built from nothing. You need me in the open, he said. Visible to all remaining players simultaneously. Creating enough pressure that every interface activates at maximum. Yes. And while I'm doing that, you're in the system's architecture. Attempting to be. Attempting. He looked at me. How long do you need? The window will last as long as the pressure event sustains. 3 minutes minimum. 5 is better. 3 to 5 minutes in the open center of this island with 4 other players who all have reasons to move against me. He said it the way he said most things, not as a complaint, just as an accurate description of the situation. What do I get out of this? If it works, the system resets. Production loses its insertion mechanism. Every fake option disappears. The remaining players operate on clean interfaces for the first time since day 1. And if it doesn't work? Then you've spent 3 to 5 minutes in the open for no result and we regroup. And you? If the access attempt fails, the system will know I tried. The response will be significant. He was quiet again. The longer kind. You should know, he said finally, that I've known since day 3 this was going to end with you asking me to do something like this. Did you decide then? I decided on day 2, he said. When you didn't go to the southern camp and I thought you were wrong and then watched you be right. He stood up. You owe me a significant debt after this. Logged and confirmed, I said. He picked up his water and drank and set it down and walked toward the camp entrance without looking back. That was Taeyang, no ceremony, no second thoughts once the decision was made. The most straightforward person I'd encountered in 11 days of people hiding everything. I watched him go and felt the specific weight of sending someone into exposure deliberately and the specific discipline required to sit with that weight rather than explain it away. Jia was at the eastern perimeter. I found her and explained what was happening in 2 minutes flat. She listened, ran her assessment, and said, the system will resist the access attempt. Yes. What does resistance look like at the core level? I don't know precisely. Based on the memory intrusion pattern, it uses your own material against you. At the core level, the material will be more concentrated. More fundamental. The original fear, she said. Yes. She looked at me steadily. You've been preparing for that. For 3 nights. Are you ready? I thought about the kitchen morning. The contract. The coffee ring. 5 nights of excavation that had stopped 1 layer above the deepest material and 3 nights of interrupts that had held the system at the threshold. I'd spent those 3 nights in the space the interrupts had bought me, going down voluntarily, ahead of the system, into the room I'd built my entire adult competency on top of. I knew what was there now. I'd named it in the dark before the island woke up. Ready enough, I said. She accepted this. What do you need from me? Watch the perimeter. If Yongji moves on our position while I'm in the access attempt, I need to know before she reaches the camp. And if she reaches the camp before you're out? Pull me out. Physically. Don't wait. She nodded once. No further questions. She turned back to the perimeter and I walked to the camp center and sat down and opened the interface. At 7:43 Taeyang walked into the island's central clearing. He didn't have to announce himself, his presence in the open was visible to every drone on the island simultaneously, which meant every player's interface updated with his position in real time, which meant every threat assessment layer activated, which meant every decision engine fired. 5 interfaces. Maximum throughput. Simultaneous. I felt the system's processing load spike in the same way you feel a pressure change before a storm, not through the normal interface channels but through the base layer, the foundational architecture underneath the tabs and the maps and the decision engine. The seams appeared exactly where the access pattern data had predicted they would, 3 connection points between the genuine system and the production overlay, running like fault lines through the interface architecture. I went in through the middle one. The core was not what I'd expected. I'd built a mental model of it as a technical space code architecture, data structures, the mechanical interior of a system. What the access revealed was closer to a mirror. Not literally, not a visual metaphor. A functional one. The core was a reflection surface that had been trained on 11 days of my decisions, my fears, my patterns, my memory material, until the reflection was indistinguishable from the original. The system hadn't been building a model of me. It had been building a version of me. A replica constructed from the inside out, from the original fear upward through every decision layer, that could generate options I would find plausible, responses I would find authentic, pressure that would land where pressure landed on me specifically and nowhere else. It was nearly complete. I looked at the replica and understood what it was for. Not to control me directly. Direct control was crude, detectable, the kind of manipulation the diagnostic module had been built to catch. The replica was for replacement. A gradual substitution, my decision-making architecture swapped out for a version that looked identical from the inside but was oriented differently. Not toward survival. Toward spectacle. Toward the specific kind of interesting that made wealthy people in distant buildings increase their bets. The system wasn't trying to break me. It was trying to become me. I had 4 minutes before Taiyang's exposure window closed. I found the replica's foundation, the original fear layer, the deepest material the system had been excavating toward for 5 nights. It was there, rendered accurately, the thing I'd named in the dark, not the fear of failure, not the fear of loss. The fear of being invisible. Of making no mark. Of going through the full duration of a life without anyone registering that it had happened. The system had found it. Had built the replica's foundation on it. Had intended to use it as the primary leverage point, the place where fake options would feel most real, where the pressure would land deepest, where the distinction between the system's preferred outcome and my own desire would be hardest to detect. I looked at it without flinching. I'd had 3 nights to practice. Then I did the thing I'd built toward for 11 days. I didn't destroy the replica. I didn't overwrite it. I changed one thing, the foundational orientation. The original fear, reframed. Not fear of invisibility as a vulnerability the system could press. Requirement for significance as a design parameter. The same material, the same architecture, the same fear, pointed in a different direction. The system built to make me perform for the cameras. The replica now built to finish the game on my terms. The difference was everything. I came out of the access attempt at 7:47. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. The interface looked the same. The tabs, the maps, the decision engine unchanged on the surface. But the production overlay was gone. The connection points between the genuine system and the insertion mechanism had closed, sealed by the replica's new orientation, which treated unauthorized external access as a threat rather than an input source. No more fake options. The decision engine activated once as I returned to full awareness, a genuine activation, clean and clear, the pressure landing with the full authentic weight I hadn't felt in days. Option 1, approach Yongji directly, alliance formally dissolved, terms negotiated for final phase. Risk, she declines, immediate confrontation. Option 2, hold position, allow final phase to develop on resource attrition. Risk, mine June recovers, timeline extends. Option 3, signal production team directly via interface broadcast, expose insertion mechanism publicly to all active interfaces. Risk, production response unpredictable, all player interfaces affected. I read all 3. Ran the module out of habit. All genuine. All with real costs. No 4th option. No clean exits. I was about to select option 3 when Jia's voice came from the eastern perimeter, not a shout. Her voice didn't shout, but the specific clipped tone she used when information was urgent. Yongji is moving. Northern approach. All 3 players. I stood up. Taiyang was coming back through the western tree line, unhurried as always, the walk of a man who had done what was required and was now returning to find out if it had mattered. I looked at the interface. Option 3 was still open. Signal production team directly via interface broadcast, expose insertion mechanism publicly to all active interfaces. All active interfaces. Including Yongji's. Including Minjun's. Every player on the island receiving the same broadcast simultaneously, the evidence of the fake options, the sponsored insertions, the 11 days of manipulation that had been running beneath the stated rules of the game. The production team's response would be immediate and unpredictable. But unpredictable cut in all directions. And 5 players who suddenly understood that the game had been running on false information would be 5 players whose next decisions were their own. I selected option 3. The interface broadcast for exactly 8 seconds, a compressed data package, the entire 11-day log of insertion events, fake option signatures, memory access events, the replica architecture and its reorientation transmitted simultaneously to every active interface on the island. Then the system went quiet. Not offline. Quiet. The specific stillness of an architecture that has just had something fundamental changed inside it and is processing what that means. The drones above the island stopped moving. Every single one. Simultaneously. Taeyang came through the camp entrance and looked at the frozen drones and then at me. "Did it work?" he said. I looked at the player map. 5 markers, still active. The production overlay connection points, gone. The insertion mechanism, sealed. The replica, reoriented and integrated, running the genuine system from a foundation I'd built rather than one the system had excavated. "Ask me in 10 minutes, I said. Ja appeared at the camp's southern edge. Yongji stopped moving. All 3 players, static. She paused. "She's reading something." The broadcast. 11 days of evidence landing in her interface in real time. I looked at the frozen drones overhead. Somewhere in a building far from this island, people were looking at screens that had just gone wrong in a way they hadn't designed for. Decisions were being made about what came next. Response protocols were being activated. The production team's version of a diagnostic module was running on the problem I'd just created for them. The game was still happening. 5 players on an island, resources running, the final phase still in motion. But the board had changed. I opened the threat assessment tab and created a new entry, not a threat, a status update, production insertion mechanism, neutralized. Interface integrity, restored. Replica architecture, reoriented. Core access, complete. Then I looked north, where the drones still hung motionless against the sky, and waited to find out what the people who built this game were going to do when the game stopped running their way. Part 8, confirm. The drones stayed frozen for 6 minutes. I counted. Not from anxiety, from data collection. 6 minutes was long enough to confirm the freeze wasn't a technical glitch or a broadcast interruption. 6 minutes was a decision. Someone on the production side had pressed pause deliberately, which meant someone on the production side was deciding what came next, which meant what I'd done had reached far enough up the chain to require a decision at a level that didn't usually touch the daily operation of the game. Good. That was the correct level. Taeyang sat down at the fire with the patience of a man who had learned over 11 days that sitting down was usually the right response to situations that didn't immediately require standing up. He didn't ask questions. He watched the frozen drones and waited. Ja came in from the perimeter and stood at the camp's edge and looked at the player map over my shoulder. 5 markers, all static. Yongji's group holding position 200 meters north. Minjun alone on the western coast, his marker motionless, he'd received the broadcast too. 11 days of evidence landing in the interface of the man who'd built the island's first power structure and watched it dismantled and had been surviving alone in the western quadrant for 3 days on whatever the system's resource mapping could find for a single player with no allies and nothing left to protect. I thought about what that broadcast looked like from inside Minjun's interface. Every fake option logged. Every sponsored insertion documented. The specific events where production had tried to engineer conflicts for viewer metrics. The southern camp attack that I hadn't intervened in because the intervention option had been fabricated. The non-aggression negotiation that had been cleaned precisely because Minjun hadn't known fake options existed and therefore hadn't used them. 11 days of a game that had been running on 2 levels simultaneously, the one the players could see and the one they couldn't. Now everyone could see both. The drones came back online at minute 7. Not all at once, sequentially, from north to south, as if someone was bringing them up individually rather than executing a system restart. The deliberate pace of a controlled resumption. Someone was choosing what to show and in what order. The last drone to reactivate was the one positioned directly above our camp. It held position for 4 seconds. Then moved slowly, a tracking movement, the specific arc of a camera reframing its shot. It was centering on me. My interface activated. One window. No options. Just text, and the text wasn't from the decision engine and it wasn't from the threat assessment layer. It was from a channel I hadn't seen before, no tab label, no system header, just words appearing in the center of my visual field with the clean urgency of something that had bypassed the entire interface architecture to get there directly. P14. You have 60 seconds to make a final decision. The game does not end because you exposed the mechanism. The game ends when there is one player remaining or when a player chooses voluntary exit. Those are the only two conclusions. Choose. I read it twice. The timer appeared below the text. 60 seconds. Counting. Taeyang was looking at me. He could see from my face that something had activated. Jia had turned from the perimeter. Somewhere 200 meters north, Yongji was reading the same message in her own interface. Somewhere on the western coast, Jun was reading it alone. The game doesn't end because you exposed the mechanism. Of course it didn't. The mechanism was the production layer, the sponsored insertions, the fake options, the memory excavations. The game itself, underneath all of that, was still exactly what the man in the white jacket had described on the first morning: 24 people, 1 island, 1 winner. I'd neutralized the manipulation. I hadn't changed the rules. The rules had been real the whole time. The manipulation had been running on top of them. 40 seconds. I looked at Taeyang. He looked back with the expression of a man waiting to find out if the debt he was owed was going to be collected in a world where collection was possible. I looked at Jia. Her face was running the assessment it always ran: behavioral read, decision prediction, outcome modeling. Whatever she saw in my expression resolved into something that looked, for the first time in 11 days, like uncertainty. 30 seconds. I opened my mouth to say something to both of them, something that would have been the wrong kind of moment, the preamble to a decision rather than the decision itself. Then I stopped. Looked at the timer. Looked at the drone above our camp, its lens pointing directly down. Millions of people watching a screen somewhere, watching a man with 20 seconds left count down toward a choice that had been real from the beginning, underneath everything, waiting for the manipulation to be stripped away so it could be made honestly. 20 seconds. I looked at the text. Choose. I thought about the man in the white jacket, the interesting ones survive. I thought about the replica I'd reoriented at the core, the original fear, reframed. Not invisibility as a wound. Significance as a direction. 10 seconds. Taeyang said quietly, not a question, you know what you're going to do. He was right. I always had. I reached into the interface. The timer hit 0.